Hi folks, Harry Frank from Gray Machine here, and in this tutorial I'm going to be going through this title animation that I made right here, and the focus is going to be, as you guessed it, CC Flow Motion. Let's go through and explore some different, all the different ideas that we can achieve using Flow Motion. So I'm going to start a new comp. I like to work at 1280 by 720, and I'm just going to start with some text. I'll just use the same text that I used before. And just to show you Flow Motion, create an adjustment layer. So actually what I usually do is just create a solid, Command Y. I'll call this Flow Motion adjustment. I like to make my adjustment layers gray just to differentiate them from background layers, and click on the adjustment layer switch right there. We'll go to our effects, which I'll just hit Command 5, Control 5 in Windows, and we'll type out Flow, CC Flow Motions under the distort category. Now, if I apply this to the adjustment layer and I turn it up, we're going to see some weird things happening. First of all, well, we've got these two knots right here. This is what they call the knot points. And if we turn up the amount, we'll see, it's doing this distortion, and it's limited right now to the area of the text. This is just kind of a shortcoming of the plugin. Nothing we're doing wrong here. It should be able to work with the full layer, but it doesn't. So let's create a solid background. And I'll just make this our black background. Basically, we're flooding the alpha channel with a solid color. And now, zoom in a little bit. Make sure we're working full resolution. Now this extends all the way to the edges of the comp window. Now this is one thing you can do with Flow Motion. It does this sort of repeating and tiling effect, which you can turn off by turning off this tile edges switch. If I move this text through, it does some interesting stuff. And I'm sure there's some creative stuff that you can do with this, but my focus is really on taking this value, reset amount number 2, and taking the amount and using a negative value. So I'll set this to something like -50. So if I move this text through, we get this kind of, well, spherical distortion area. And depending on what we put in front of this effect, there's some really interesting things that we get. So first of all, let me center this knot that it calls. I'll put this right in the center of the screen. Tap the what is that? The apostrophe to put our grid or center point and title safe areas here. So, or actually, I guess I could go over here and just type 640 by 360. Also get my center point. So as I move this text from one side to the other, it's going to get this interesting spherical distortion. That's actually kind of the starting point of my animation. So I'll go back to the beginning, hit P, or actually Option P to create a keyframe, and then we'll make this maybe a 4-second animation. So I'll move this all the way to the other side. I'm going to adjust this amount just a little bit to bring the that spherical area down in size just a bit. Probably, yeah, -35 seems to be about right. Now, as interesting as that is with text, it gets a lot more interesting when we start using different types of elements. I'm going to use a flare element, and to do this, I'll use optical flares. Back to our effects presets. Drop optical flares on our layer. And let's move this source point. You notice that my source point is right here, but it's kind of distorted out in a different spot. So let me move that in. And the closer it gets to this spherical distortion areas, the more this kind of turns into this, actually, let's turn off this text, this distorted sphere. And you can get some really cool stuff with this depending on where it is and what kind of effect you're going for. So this is actually going to be my final point for my lens flare. So let's go back to our 4-second mark, and that's our landing point. And then we'll do it, I don't know, we'll have it start up here and kind of move downward. Definitely want that to ease in. In fact, we probably want it let's go to our speed graph here. Probably really want that to really slow to a stop. Next, I'm going to drop a texture in here using this brushed metal. I think I actually shot this with my iPhone. This is one of those textures I use a lot. So this is going to be a little bit of a glassy texture that works in conjunction with our flow motion effect. So again, putting it below that adjustment layer. Now, what would be great is if flow motion had the ability to crop to that spherical area, but it doesn't. And no matter what I really do here, even if I using mask, because masks are calculated before effects, the mask affects the distortion effect. So what ends up happening is that it doesn't work, basically. So what we're going to have to do is create a matte layer. So I'll create a layer that I call my circle matte. Now what I'm going to do is actually use the circle effect under generate circle. Set this, let's just solo that and bring up the radius. I like the idea of having a point and radius control rather than using a mask, because, well, if we wanted to connect this mask point or feather it, that kind of stuff. I mean, really, it's very, very similar to using a mask on there. I just think a circle is a little bit more flexible. So let's go to our modes and track mattes here. I'm going to set this brushed metal track matte to use that circle matte and use its alpha channel and put it above flow motion. There we go. Now, to give this a little bit of a spherical effect, we could do one of two things. We could use flow motion. I put that on here. So the knot should be, actually no, it's not in the center because this image is larger than the comp size. So I'll put it right in the comp center and bring up this amount. So I could use flow motion. Another option would be to use CC lens. So let's actually turn off this track matte, scale the image way down. So that's another option. In fact, I think I like how that looks. But I still would like to vary this a little bit so it's not so solid. I'd like to give it kind of a fall off so that the front of the surface that's pointing to the camera, has less opacity. And I'm going to do that by actually using this circle matte, bringing the radius down, and giving it some feather and inverting it. There, so our focus is really just on the edges. So as the surface is facing away from the camera, that's where we get that reflection. And I can probably dial down the opacity. That's looking pretty cool. Now, I have that CC flow motion actually still applied. Now, one thing I noticed as I was animating this, that it actually, for some reason, kind of made sense to have the texture change a little bit, as if our perspective might be changing on it. Or anyway, I can still use that CC flow motion. I'm going to dial it down quite a bit, maybe set it to 5 or so. Let's give us some more room here. And if I move this knot point around just a little bit, we can get this texture movement just a little bit. Don't want a whole lot. But I noticed as I was animating this that having the texture be stationary just made it not very interesting. So I'm going to animate this knot point in CC flow motion over the course of that 4 seconds. Now I think this texture could be blending a little bit better. I believe screen is probably the best way to go about that. Maybe bring it down a little bit more. There, definitely getting there. So we've got our text layer turned off, so let's turn that on. So it looks like everything's kind of hitting right at the same spot here. We have everything kind of sharing this adjustment layer except for our brushed metal, which seems to be getting right about the right size. Okay, now before we get too far, let's turn on motion blur for the comp and motion blur for that text layer and give a little bit of blur as it moves. And I'm also going to add some blur out on the edges here, just so that this text, our focus isn't so heavy on that text area outside of the circle. So let's kind of de-emphasize that area. Let's create another adjustment layer and apply blur. So I'll just use a basic fast blur, turn this up maybe to 10 or 15 or so, and we'll just mask out the area outside of the sphere. So I'm going to hold down a bunch of keys here, Shift, Alt, and Command, or Shift, All, or Alt in Windows, Option on the Mac, Command, I don't know, just take all the keys and hold them down. Basically what we're doing is Shift constrains the XY proportions, Command scales it from the center. I guess that's actually all I really need, those two. You don't need Alt. Oh, Alt disables the rendering, so you can work a lot more quickly. That's right. So I'm masking out that blur area. I can either select invert, I can go to subtract, kind of the same thing, and hit F, show our mask feathering, kind of feather it out a little bit. So we're just kind of de-emphasizing this area outside. In fact, what if we did a horizontal blur? No, I don't like that. Let's stick with a Gaussian blur. Or I should say fast blur, Gaussian distribution, or horizontal and vertical. Let's leave that at 15. Okay, so now I'm going to have the main text rotate into place. I'm going to use a second text layer for this, and let's actually just get rid of all the keyframes on this. And let's move it back out here. I'm going to scale this down quite a bit so it's actually inside that sphere layer. That's where we want it to land. Again, let's reference our center point. So we see that halfway point on the text right there and our center point right there. Looks like everything's nicely centered. Now, when I did this in my original, I actually, instead of using flow motion, I used another 3D effect, which is CC Sphere. Now, to work with CC Sphere, which is under Perspective, CC Sphere right there, it again works with the source size of the text. And this doesn't do a whole lot of good for us. So what we need to do is pre-compose this so that this is our flow motion text. Or type. Now I can apply CC Sphere and let's zoom in, go to our rotation here and rotate this in Y. And this is really what it's going to do, is kind of start back here and rotate into place like that. I don't like the shading because I don't have anything else that's really shaded like this. So I'm going to go into the shading section and set this ambient shading to 100 so we don't have any of that light fall off. I'm also going to, as I rotate this back, right to where I see that last letter on its side, is set this render to only outside. So we don't see that inside rendering. So we'll keyframe this from the beginning to 4 seconds. We might have to fine tune the timing of this, but it's a good start here. Okay. Definitely want to ease that in, F9 that keyframe, and let's see how it all mixes together. Now, as I found with my original, this animation of the text definitely had to come in a bit delayed. Now it's not actually aligned with the sphere that we've got in the background, so let's go to our sphere radius, turn that up until it hits that edge. Now, again, here's something that's, I guess, optional. As it's rotating around, I thought, well, it really should have a little bit of distortion where it hits right there. And the best option I could find for that is actually using CC Lens again. So as you can see, we get that heavy edge distortion like that. So the size, we'll definitely want to line up with the size of the sphere and turn this convergence way down. Just a little bit. Now that's kind of optional because really we're kind of negating what we've done with the CC sphere. So you could have this either use CC Lens or CC sphere, or if you want, I'll just leave them both on. Really, I just want that thing to kind of spin in, rotate in, and kind of match that spherical distortion. Oh, now I think it's coming in a little bit late. Now, at that point, when it lands, we want that convergence to come way down. So I'm going to animate that convergence over time so that it zeroes out when the text lands. Another thing that I found that helps, because there's this moment in time where the text layers kind of overlap and conflict with each other and just don't quite work. So as it moves in, I think a little bit of blur, animated blur over time, using a simple fast blur. So again, we want it to zero out at its ending point, and then over here, kind of draw a focus away from it. Now, inside this spherical area, because it is kind of glassy, I think a simple RGB effect would be really handy here. So what I'm going to do is use an adjustment layer and restrict that adjustment layer to the area of the sphere. Now I'm going to use something from Red Giant Universe. Now, if you know me and what I'm involved in, I work with Red Giant, and I've been pretty heavily involved in Universe. And one of the cool things about Universe is a lot of the plugins are simply free. So even though I'm using this and you might not have Universe installed, you can download Universe and use a lot of these for free. And the one that I'm going to show you is free, Simple RGB Separation. So I'm going to drop that on my adjustment layer. Remember, I restricted that adjustment layer to that spherical area. I'm going to go into my radius here and just pull this apart just a little bit. We've got an angle control here too, if you'd like to change where they are being, or the direction where they're being spread. In fact, I could bring this mask down even more. So I'm just kind of hitting the inside area and feather out this mask. From here, some finishing touches. Just a little bit of shine, I think, is gonna help a little bit here. Let's type shine. Trap code is always way at the bottom outside of my capture area here. So let's pull it out of the effects and presets and set our blending mode to screen. If we use our colorize here, if we can set the colorize to none, it'll simply pull the source color from the original image, bring down that shine opacity, and yeah, well, maybe set this to about 50%. Now, I definitely think it needs some color correction. So let's add another adjustment layer, and we'll just use some simple curves here. Nothing fancy. So color correction, curves. We want to give it some contrast. So I'm going to pull those dark areas down and push those bright areas up just a little bit. Your typical S curve. And then you can play with the color however you like. I think maybe pulling a little more of that blue in, or actually pulling some of the reds out. So I'll take this red, bring it down, emphasize that blue. And then in green, if you like more of a aqua-ish kind of green, or aqua kind of blue, you can push the midpoints of that green up a little bit. Before and after. Color correction always helps. Now, one thing I thought was cool when this lands, kind of going back to one of the first things we talked about, is that lens flare and the flow motion effect. Let me move this up. Let's just solo that. Optical flares and flow motion adjustment layer. So as you can see, it's taken the spikes of that lens flare, which I'm just using the default lens flare. It's taking the spikes and bending around this spherical area. So if I go into, let's say, something like this animation evolution, I can make those evolve a little bit over time. In fact, we can enhance that by using the shimmer effect from Shine. So if you want to really pull that shimmering effect up quite a bit, let's drop Trapcode Shine on here. Now we want to match that point, the source point of Shine, to the optical flares. Now, because it is animating, I think it would probably be best if we use an expression. Just option click on it, alt click on the Shine source point, grab the pick whip, and link it to the position X, Y. Oops, looks like I missed. There we go. There, so as that moves, Shine is going to move right along with it. In fact, if I set the Shine effect to use, oops, and colorize, electric is a very blue preset. So we could do that. I'll do what I did before, set this to none, so it pulls the original color of that lens flare of the source. And let's solo that. Go into Shine, and under Shimmer, crank this amount up. This is basically the size and detail of what I assume to be some sort of fractal noise that gets mixed in with the source. So if I turn up that shimmer amount and the detail, I can go into the phase here and animate this over time to get more of that shimmering flicker. And with the flow motion turned on, we get a bit of that, well, that shimmering flicker after the distortion. So adjust yours to taste. So I'm going to go into the phase here, option, click on that phase so we can have it constantly animating. I'll just use a little expression here, time times 120. So this will be constantly evolving. There. Looks like I got it pretty close to the source. It's always a challenge, kind of doing this on the fly. Looks like in the original, I did a little color correction on the sphere. Yep. So yeah, maybe do that. Go into color correction, add some curves to that sphere. I think it's actually okay. Maybe a little bit of contrast. Looks like I pushed some of the blue up. But honestly, I don't think it really desperately needs it. So that's my original. That's my current version. Actually, I kind of like my tutorial version that I did on the fly a little bit better. So I'll post this whole project for download, including that awesome texture that I shot with my iPhone, for you to check out. I hope you get some good ideas from this and experiment with filters like flow motion, to see what you can do with them as well. So my name's Harry Frank. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next tutorial.